going to get really fun today. And how fun it is, it's like President Hinckley used to say how great sacrament meeting is depends on what you bring to it. So how fun it is today depends on what you bring. I'll bring as much as I can, but I am just one, yay, one. So I am an academic product consultant. Continuing Ed has this title, and essentially what it means is we manage academic products for campus, for continuing ed, and we consult with campus. So my products are BYU Online, which serves day students, and then Independent Study, our university courses. So I'm also the master of the house. That's a joke because, as you can see, I'm the only female. So it's kind of like my work environment. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. So today we're going to talk about a few different things. Jason wanted me to talk a little bit about navigating the university ecology. Because in my role, we work with a lot of different departments on campus, academic and non-academic departments. And I work with a lot of instructional design teams. I used to be one of the instructional designers. And so there are kind of all these interesting things that play into the ecosystem. So for those who don't remember their 7th grade science terminology, we'll quickly review what ecology and what an ecosystem are. We'll talk about some things that impact university ecologies, some things that can help us navigate the university ecosystem, and then look at a little bit of the evolution that's happening. So, when I say ecosystem, you might think of the earth and beautiful, peaceful, calm things, but what it really feels like sometimes when you're navigating a complex ecosystem is really challenging and messy. So ecology, these are organisms that are related to each other in their surroundings, right? The ecosystem is how that community of organisms interacts together. So an ecology might be things like faculty members, administrators, values that people bring, funding, policies, attitudes that people have, students, right? So in our ecology here, we have lots of different organisms. Now over here, you can get kind of an idea of the ecosystem, how all of these organisms might interact. And you can see, like, there's really a lot going on in the university ecosystem. If you just look at the ASB alone, for example, on our campus, registration, financial aid, the honor code office, accessibility, copyright, multicultural student services, like just in one building on our campus, right? So that kind of gives you an idea. And then for continuing ed, we also have we have all this ecology on the campus, as well as people off of the campus who use our products, right? So students, parents of students, Title IX officers, NCAA administrators, all these other elements. So those all come together and make this beautiful potpourri. So here's one element of something that can impact the ecology. This is, I'm not sure how to say his name, Podolskis and Baum. They published this article just last month. If any of you read the Inside Higher Ed, you probably saw some highlights. Kind of a disruptive article for those of us involved with online learning. So the title of it, Does Online Education Live Up to Its Promise? A look at the evidence and implications for federal policy. Every university administrator is paying attention to this article. And if they're not, eek, because federal policy impacts universities significantly, right? So some interesting highlights from this article that they published. Fully online university coursework has contributed to increasing gaps in educational success. So like trigger warning, right? And then they talk about that employers actually attribute lower value to online degrees than any other provider, even for-profit providers. And they talk about how employers, they did the survey, employers had negative associations with online colleges, and students also, there was some implication that they might pay kind of lower tribute to online degrees. So this is just one example, one single article that can impact the ecology and, of course, the overall functioning of the ecosystem going on at any given university. As at any university, here at BYU, stability matters. And in fact, our administration cares a lot about stability, and of course there's a BYU reputation, and there's a lot kind of rolled up into the BYU identity. If someone says, what's a BYU experience like? What kind of things might you say? Hit me. What is the BYU experience? You hear it a lot, right?
Devotional.
Devotional.
Sports.
Thank you, Georgia. Other things?
The honor code?
What's that?
The honor code.
The honor code? Yeah, that's
Ford University.
right. So there are all kinds of things rolled into that one element of the BYU experience. And our administration really cares about what people think the BYU experience is. They want students to feel like they're surrounded by a community of people of the same faith, that there's the honor code, so there are certain things you understand and can expect about your fellow students, a lot of things. Anyway, so navigating the ecosystem. These are 5 key elements as coined by yours truly, based on purely anecdotal evidence in my own experience. So I've been working in my role for about almost 4 years, and these are the things that just seem to always bubble up. And when I was an instructional designer, similar issues that kind of always seem to bubble up. So first of all, you really have to understand your stakeholder values. And of course, to understand those values, you have to understand who the stakeholders are that you care about. So President Trump, in a kind of distant way, is a stakeholder because he's the president of our country who leads the team who determines federal policy that impacts higher ed, that impacts policies that we have to have on our university. But frankly, I didn't watch the whole State of the Union last night. I'll watch it eventually, right? But it wasn't like his values aren't going to be the first thing I'm worried about. But there are other stakeholders whose values I'm really concerned about, like the AVP and the IVP and President Worthen and deans of academic departments and chairs and faculty and students. Those are stakeholders who are immediately pertinent while I'm working in the setting. So then we want to understand their values. Then when we have people working together on a project, we need to understand timeframes, sensitivities. For example, with BYU Online, there's a very specific time frame sensitivity with the development of a course. So from when a faculty presents or proposes a course for BYU Online development, there's 1 semester to develop the course, and then there's a pilot semester, and then the course is on its way to full teenage adolescence and adulthood. So those timeframes matter though, and if a faculty is assigned to develop a course in this one given semester, and in fact they're not study abroad that semester, that's a problem, right? So it's important for us to understand timeframes as well as sensitivities, and some of those sensitivities might also be some internal departmental sensitivities, like, well, this is the first time I'm teaching this course, and now I'm the one developing it, but I know the 3 other senior faculty who have taught it for the last 15 years are going to have some comments about it. I'm going to need help navigating that, right? So there are a lot of things to consider that way. Then that kind of rolls nicely into issues and concerns. That can be things like that federal policy, article that I was referencing. Issues and concerns can be things like, I'm having some health problems and I can't teach my course the way I want to this semester. I need some help. Can we push some things online quickly for the rest of the semester? Or there could be issues and concerns like, our department lost some adjunct funding and we don't have enough people to teach all the sections we have. Or it could be President Worthen wants students to be able to take 15% of their coursework online by 2020. Well, some faculty have some pretty fundamental concerns with that, regardless of whether it means what do we have to put online, or I disagree philosophically with online education. So there's this whole gamut, and it's important to try to figure out what those are among your stakeholders, address those, and then that rolls nicely into the administration of your project. So if you're working on a design team, you're already working with some of these elements in your ecosystem. But then you also have like the personality traits of your design team or your project team. And so sometimes it's a pleasant surprise to realize, oh, someone on my team is really task-oriented, really focused on the details, and always on time. But usually what you encounter is, no one's submitting anything on time for our deadlines. What am I going to do? And as you navigate through that project, there's this whole administration piece of, you know what, I figured out that the best way to work with Sandy is just to go sit down with her and spend an hour and hammer it out.
Good luck
You know, or whatever it is, right? And so that element of administrating your project can really take a lot of, I guess, perceptive skills, right? To identify like, oh, it turns out McCoo really prefers to just talk in person and not email. And in fact, he doesn't ever read his email, or whatever it is, right? So, unfair typifications here. And then finally, I should have not put my sleep on. Is it coming back? Okay. And then finally, making sure that we're meeting our goals, right? So that's an important aspect in your ecosystem. If, of course, meeting goals is a value. So in secondary education in the public school system, I found that certain stakeholders had the value of meeting goals and others didn't even know there were goals. So elements to consider. Okay, so here's an example. A few years ago, we developed Korean 101 and 102 blended and fully online versions. And these we mapped out to the same as the face-to-face, so same learning objectives, same content, same assessments, obviously some different deployment of the content and assessments than what she was doing face-to-face. So we looked at sensitivities and concerns. Some of the faculty members in the department were really philosophically opposed to trying to do introductory language in a blended or online format. They really, so think about how many of you have learned a second language? Everyone. So think about when you were first learning that second language, the importance of a physical presence with someone, the importance of having feedback, having an interlocutor, you know, things like that, right? So some of the faculty were really, really concerned about, this is elementary language instruction, your foundations, and you're not going to be face-to-face for the whole thing. So there was that, which I don't think I even put that on there. I didn't really. But then there were these other concerns too, like, well, students might hate it, or they might not even need it. But this faculty who was developing the course had students coming to her and saying, hey, I found this app online to practice my Korean. Do we do any of this stuff in the class? Or they would come to her and say, hey, I watched this thing on YouTube and I'm trying to figure out like what they were describing and what you were describing in lecture. And she quickly realized they needed more than what she could just give them in a 1-hour class period every day. So there's also this concern of maybe the student ratings are going to go down because they don't see me as often in a blended setting, and in an online setting, they don't ever see me face-to-face. So, and then there's this element of, after one semester, this became a concern, binge studying. Well, in the fully online course, it's self-paced, and you know, what do you know? In the last 6 weeks of a student's enrollment, suddenly they were just so on task and just turning in so much homework, and she was like, this isn't a good pattern for especially an elementary language course. And then of course, always the concern that students be able to meet all the learning objectives. So there was just one element of our whole ecosystem that I was working through with this faculty member. When I looked at the values, she really wanted to improve her pedagogy and she really wanted to improve the student learning, right? So when students were saying they needed, you know, she was picking up that they needed more, they wanted more. She wanted to find a way to do that, but you can't have class, you know, language classes are already 5 days a week. There's not another day to add instruction, and it's still just a 4-credit-hour class. So we looked at that, and then this BYU Online initiative came out with President Worthen, this goal of 15% online by 2020, and she said, let's do this, I want to support the president's initiative. and I want to meet the needs of my students, and I'm willing to take some of the risks that my ratings might suffer while I learn how to teach in this different way. And maybe the biggest key to this whole story working is we've been iterative. Every semester there's been something that she's tweaked and refined. And the beauty with an online course is you know exactly what didn't work because you have course diagnostics. You have data. You know, in your face-to-face class, you still can do that. And if you take Randy's evaluation or assessment classes, then you'll learn how to do that. But it's so nice when you have it in an LMS that calculates your difficulty discrimination of your items for you and spits out quickly and easily for you how many students are at risk of failing, how many students are on pace, and you know, all kinds of diagnostics about how your students are doing. So we've iterated a lot. And also, we try to not get too stuck in the weeds. So what happened one semester can't drive everything that she does for every semester thereafter, right? And of course, the E part of ADDIE, everyone knows what ADDIE is, the design process. So evaluate is the one that kind of always seems to not quite have enough time or attention. This faculty member was really interested in the evaluate part, and so that helped us really strengthen that part of our whole ecosystem thriving, because there are all these organisms out there that wanted to know, oh, well, Julie's doing this in her course, I wonder what's happening. And you know, faculty kind of speculating, other language departments kind of watching. Can you really do introductory Korean online? Like there's no way the students are going to learn it or whatever. So there were kind of all these outside forces looking at what's happening. So it was really critical for her to have good, strong, evaluative information. And so all these different things impact the ecosystem. I have a lot of stories like that, but that's kind of my favorite one because it was a faculty member who was really, really engaged and cared about that. She ended up winning an award in the College of Humanities, which is one of our largest colleges on campus. She also received recognition from our administration for what she's doing with her classes, and she's published some research comparing her face-to-face blended and online courses. All of that ripple is part of, you know, my role, being able to say, even if I were just the instructional designer, being aware of all these other elements in the ecosystem and how what's happening in her one or two courses can, you know, can have an impact. So, evolving ecology. The university ecology, especially when it comes to online and blended learning, is evolving, as we know. It's not, we're not quite a hiss and a byword anymore on most, I think in many cases, I can't say that's probably blanket truth, but research and policy. So in that first article I mentioned earlier, they mentioned also that little research has been done about the rapid growth of online master's programs in recent years. Further research is needed. We're starting to see more coming out in the literature, but of course, like this department on this campus, our faculty are insane, prolific writers. I don't know how they do it, but also like the students in our department produce a lot, and it's important to contribute to this body of literature. It matters, and I'm involved with the working committee with the legal department, who's involved with the committee at the U.S. Department of Education defining distance and correspondence education. And one of the metrics that they're looking at is literature on the field, out in the field. And so like our contribution to the field matters to help federal policymakers be informed. You know, it's important. Then we've got internal and external organisms. So technology, the article talked about technology having the potential to create meaningful opportunities for low-income students. I was in a class with Jimmy Hernandez. He's not in our program. I think he's in IME. Some of you have been, I know Cecil, you're in a class too, right? But anyway, he had a research focus on social justice and how online learning can bring opportunities to people who are often don't have the same educational opportunities, right? Georgia Tech has a computer science program that, by these guys' evaluation, appeared to be expanding access in an affordable and valuable way. There's this huge momentum that's growing for online education. So that article wasn't all scary and ugly, but it was able to show how the ecology is evolving. Everything's not all kumbaya, peace and flowers yet, but I think there's a lot of growth happening. So, more research is coming out, like I mentioned. We're seeing more research about tech-enabled courses, fully online, blended, alt-credentialing, competency-based education. The article, the headlines back in, I think it was October or so, that was talking about all these companies that aren't requiring college degrees anymore, like Apple and Google and whoever. Like, that's a pretty significant disruptor in our overall economy and our educational system, and then I mentioned the Department of Ed is revising their definitions of distance and correspondence education. Why that matters is because universities have to comply with that policy, and that impacts financial aid eligibility. So that matters for university financial aid distribution, and of course, for students receiving financial aid. And then of course, all these diverse paths to competency, skills, and opportunities to get into professional paths without necessarily having a traditional four-year degree. Here at BYU, we're also seeing some evolution. We have increased LMS options. So it used to only be Learning Suite, and now Canvas is available to faculty as well. We have campus licenses for some nice tech like React and VoiceThread and a lot of other things. So when OIT adopts a license for campus use, they're very careful about their adoption of licenses. And so I find it optimistic that they are increasing the number of licenses that they're acquiring for campus use. We've had a 100% increase of blended courses every year since 2015. That's, I think, pretty notable. We have 129 online courses through BYU Online. And then, of course, there are lots and lots of faculty who are kind of blending or doing things online their own way that isn't necessarily through the vetted program that that's not even documented. This to me is fascinating. The number of students taking BYU Online courses. So that's day students on our campus, right? In fall, just last fall, we had over 8,500 students. This semester, 10,000 students and 800 were waitlisted just for online sections. And only 129 courses. It's not like everything on campus is available online. So you can see that there's just a growing maybe awareness and willingness to try online learning. Graduate studies. So a couple of weeks ago, someone said to me, well, graduate courses will never go online because we know the graduate office doesn't approve online education. Well, there are 13 graduate courses in development or live through BYU Online right now, and several are from this department. And we met with graduate studies, maybe it was last week, and they just said, well, obviously IP&T should have courses online. I mean, it's kind of their wheelhouse, So it's interesting to see how philosophies on campus are evolving as well. And there's now a vetted research grant that's available for work that's tied to BYU Online. So that was launched last year, mid-year, I think. And that's pretty impressive to have a grant that our own campus is offering to faculty for doing research with online work. So here's what President Worthen said recently to the AVP Council, that BYU Online is a tool to bless more students. It's an opportunity to develop and innovate in an area that has potential to be an important part of student learning. In that letter, he also talked about how blended and online education has the opportunity to improve access for students, to help them complete their degrees in a more efficient time frame, and also to improve pedagogy. And in my experience, when you work with faculty to look at what portions of the course might you move online or what might you keep face-to-face, it kind of causes some metacognition there where you reflect on well, what am I doing in class and what is critical and what can a computer be doing better than or more efficiently than I'm doing? And what really do I, the human, need to do, and do we, the humans, need to do together? And it tends to really improve overall pedagogy. So we have talked about ecology and ecosystems, talked about some factors, considerations in navigating that ecosystem, and some evolution, future implications. I think there's a lot of momentum out there, and I think we have a lot of opportunities to contribute significantly to the literature and to decisions that are happening in the higher ed realm. So voila, that is, and I am alive to tell you it is possible to navigate this ecosystem. It is not without interesting and diverse landscape, but it's a great adventure. And we have opportunities, especially coming out of this program, to bring richness and depth to any university ecosystem with our experience and our background. Questions? Yes?
So you mentioned that there are times where different stakeholders have conflicting values. So you might have faculty members who are like, oh no, online learning, that doesn't work, we shouldn't do that. And then conversely, you have things like Department of Education or President Worthen saying, hey, I think we should explore these things. How do you go about really trying to reconcile those differences? Or are those differences ever reconciled?
Yeah, great question. So there are a few things that I personally have done. And you can judge if you think they're a good idea or not. But I'll give an example. I was in a meeting with a department here on campus with 4 faculty who all teach the same course and 1 who would be developing the online course, and their chair. And the chair said, look, we don't have the physical space to accommodate the number of students who want to take this course, so we're going to create an online section, and I've dedicated this person is going to create the online section. And that person was clearly a little bit uncomfortable with, right there all together. And so the conversation, so this was a language course, the conversation ensued, you can't teach languages online, you'll never achieve all your learning outcomes, we're going to lose enrollments to our major, and it was just like a domino effect of everything that will go wrong. And then I said, do any of you have children who live away from you physically? Yes, they all did. Have any of you Skyped or FaceTimed with your children? Oh yeah, all the time. That's how we stay connected. And I was like, well, do you use language while you do that? Oh yeah, right. And do you feel like real connection? Yeah. And do you think that would be different for your students? And it was like, oh, right? And so, I mean, a lot of times I think it's a matter of, because I could pound in President Worthen's values all I want, right? But in the end, it hasn't become one of their values. And so for the poor faculty who got assigned the task, I knew that person was not a willing and enthusiastic participant. They were just assigned it. And so, pounding in the values isn't going to change their opinion. Another thing I do, so I try to just find a personal connection so that it kind of decreases the, whatever, not the fear factor, but kind of the another thing is we have a demo course and we let them have access to the demo course. We give them access to view what the online interactive elements of the course while students are actually in there. So they can be an observer of the course while students are interacting. And that has been really eye-opening as well when they're like, oh, students are talking just like they would in the classroom. I'm amazed, kind of thing. And then, of course, sometimes I just have them do it. So I say, we'll set up this forum, and I'll be the teacher, and you'll be the students, and we're going to do this interaction. And they're like, oh, sure enough, you can talk to each other online using web conferencing software, it turns out. But, so it's just trying to find ways that makes it, I guess, more palatable and less unfamiliar. I think another thing is having other faculty who have been successful in that environment talk about it. So there was a time when Kirk Belknap, who's in the Arabic department, said students can actually get more time speaking in the online course than they can get in the face-to-face course. And so it was kind of like, oh, he's just being, he's good at convincing people of ideas or whatever. He's just being like the salesman for his online course. But when we pulled the data, it was like 3 times as much the students were spending online practicing speaking than they could have in the classroom. So then it's like you have the power of data, you have the power of what the faculty are saying, and then we had like student ratings and stuff. But data sources always help too. If you have good data sources, then you can tell a compelling story. And usually that's what makes a difference too. Instead of just sharing data, telling a story with the data. Other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, we've got one online.
Okay.
Rhonda specifically is interested in the article referenced at the beginning of the presentation today. She's wondering if we can get more information about that article.
Yes, it's right here, the Paracelsus and Baum article.
And I will also post a link in the email listserv where we can access the shared PowerPoint. It's in a shared drive that I will send out later today.
Great. And in that article, they reference some studies that have been done as well as some studies that they did themselves. So it was, yeah, fascinating article to kick off the new year. Other questions? I'll tell you one more story. I can't remember how long I'm supposed to go. I think it's 12:50, 40, 50, okay. We had a meeting with Sandra Rogers, so the International Vice President. She is the Vice President who's over continuing education. Continuing education provides all the services for BYU Online, and the continuing education also runs independent study, which is for the off-campus, not the campus program. So we had a meeting with Sandra Rogers about some administrative concerns with both these programs. And I was kind of the quiet bystander in the meeting, right? I mean, it was the token person there in case some discrete questions were asked about minutia of the programs. But our deans were talking with her and talking about these concerns with some funding and some resourcing. And it was fascinating to me to hear her talk about the layers of issues that were loaded into each one of the questions that our deans brought to her. And, I think sometimes we take for granted how seamlessly a university operates and how, everything's set up in AIM and boom. Well, it turns out just the delineation of what type of course is listed in AIM is a multifaceted issue because that impacts financial aid, that impacts scheduling, that impacts space on campus, reservation of space, that impacts faculty assignments, that impacts chairs, knowing who can be assigned what, when, how many students because of the space, all these things. And so if we didn't have a delineator for the course type of online, well, so chairs were having a hard time knowing, oh, is the faculty teaching this course teaching 25 students because it's a room that has 25 seats? Or are they teaching, there's an exercise science class where she expanded her online section to 300. There's no classroom that she could teach on campus for that class, right? I mean, maybe Book of Mormon or American Heritage gets the big seminar rooms, but not her class, right? So she's teaching 300 students online and still getting just a one course load assignment when historically her cap was 25 students because that was the space on campus, right? So anyway, just hearing Sandy and the deans talk about all these elements that are intertwined really just opened my eyes to like how many pieces work together for the functioning of the university. Scheduling, for example, or financial aid. So if a student withdraws from a course during the semester and they had financial aid, then the university has to provide a report of how much, like the last date that the student was active in the course, because then they calculate how much financial aid the student has to repay. Well, in an online course, you have to ensure that you have, in any course, right, But in the online courses, they were saying, well, just send us the last date they logged in. Well, the last date they logged in doesn't necessarily equate to the last time they were active in the course. Because you could log in and the assignment might be read the next 5 chapters and then post discussions or post a video on YouTube presenting your project or whatever, right? It isn't necessarily logging into the course that shows their activity in the course. So we had this whole series of meetings figuring out how do we report back to federal financial aid when a student's last day of activity was in a course when they withdraw. You know, something that you might not think of. We've also had accessibility has been a really big thing that we've learned a lot about. So web accessibility requirements are a little bit involved, shall we say. So Sandy's laughing because
Understatement of the year.
she's dealing with this in independent study courses. So the web accessibility guidelines have like 4 tiers. And when lawsuits come against universities for accessibility, it's generally web accessibility, and it's generally coursework that's online, but sometimes it's their website or their service things that are online too. And then you have this whole series of, well, what is accessible enough? And how accessible to how many people? And do you have to make everything the nth degree of accessible in case you might have one student one day who has specific accessibility needs? And so that's been a fascinating conversation with course designers, media production specialists, legal counsel, copyright people. So if you're using something that's copyrighted and it's not accessible, and you add accessibility on top of it, for example, captioning or descriptive, what is that called?
Descriptive audio.
Descriptive audio transcriptions, then you have this little gray area in copyright where you're significantly changing something that's copyrighted. So like there are all these layers, right? And learning about all these layers in that whole ecosystem can be triggered by one simple thing, like a hearing impaired student calling your customer service department and saying, I can't hear any of the videos in this course, and so I can't pass my tests. Do you have some support? Right, so, oh, well, yes, we have transcripts, and we have descriptive audio transcripts, and we have closed captioning, and we have slides if it's a PowerPoint. With, you know, and so then you have this whole other element of like, there's a difference between a video or an interactive activity where you have to click and drag things, or a PowerPoint that has something going on in the PowerPoint, like maybe it has an animation where your chemistry is pouring one solution into the other and then it's exploding or something, whatever. Like there are all these different layers just in that one aspect of accessibility. So I think the key takeaway, as with any ecosystem, is recognize all the organisms at play and don't try to own the ecosystem yourself, right? Like recognize that whole community of organisms is meant to work together. And so work together, basically, you know, like take advantage of, I'm never going to know all the accessibility laws, so I'm taking full advantage of the legal counsel and the accessibility office on campus. And I'm never going to learn all the ways to make a course accessible, so I'm going to take advantage of the instructional designers and the media production specialists who know all that stuff. And then what I have at the end of the day is something that I can take to a department on campus and say, this, you're not going to get sued by a student for accessibility issues, or this is going to function, and here's why it's important that all these elements are in here. But you know, together we make that whole piece, and then that course becomes part of an ecosystem that we can take to our administration and say, this is one of many options for students to be able to fulfill their requirements here at BYU. So it's a rich and adventurous whole landscape. Anyway, yeah, please.
I have a few.
It's on here.
It's on. Can you on? Okay. I have a few questions. One is maybe everyone in this room is
I'd like to know the president Warden why he wants to increase the online courses by 2020. I'd like to know a little bit more the rationale and what he wants to achieve by increasing the online courses. The second question is, are there any activities for the transition from the traditional classroom instruction to online, like a half,
Mm-hmm.
like a half of the materials covered by in the class and half of them for
Online. Mhm.
like a mixture. And another third point is how maybe generalizability may not be the case, but how students perceive the experience, online experience.
Oh, yeah.
You already mentioned increase the number of hours they spend and so forth, but I'd like to know more, and if you can give me some source to like a publication or something to summarize the student experience online learning or something like that, I'd like to.
Yeah. Okay, so first of all, why BYU Online? President Worthen brought up 3 main points for the rationale behind BYU Online. One is that students need to, the desire for students to have more skills in online learning because the workforce that they're entering is very likely to involve some sort of online training, online interaction professionally, or continued professional development or online education for that specific job. And so it was essentially preparing students for the workforce that they'll be entering. A second reason was to improve instructor pedagogy. So I kind of already talked about that a little bit. And a third was to increase the efficiency of space use on campus. And so sometimes we have sections of classes that carry with like 5 students, and maybe it would be, that space would be better utilized for something else. Likewise, just throughput. So especially in high enrolling LEP programs, so limited enrollment programs, sometimes there are courses that don't necessarily need face-to-face for every single class session, and the bottleneck is due to space limitations. So that effective use of space might be, for example, IS 110 spreadsheets, Intro to Spreadsheets course is required for business majors. There's really no reason for them to meet face-to-face every class period. And in fact, in their face-to-face class, they only have some face-to-face meetings. So if they can allow more students to take that course because they're not bound by the limit of the seats in the classroom, then they can get more students through into actually the program. Second question was if there's kind of an intermediary. That's the blended. So blended is where you might have some face-to-face and some online. And some faculty have kind of used that as the gateway to online, right? Where they've kind of said, not really comfortable going fully online. And so they transition to a blended model. And sometimes it's still heavily face-to-face. For example, in some language courses, they meet 5 days a week, but they just decrease their meeting by 1 day a week. So it's not like massively blended, right? But in Accounting 200, for example, they started with fully face-to-face and they developed a blended. Another goal is that will eventually become fully online. Again, that's a throughput question for them. They feel like they're not disadvantaging students by having the course fully online. And then the third, how students are doing. So the Department of Education, and I can give you a link for this, they released a study of online learning, and this was like 2012. So I think they've done some amendments since. But ultimately, what they came away with was, when implemented effectively, that students were not at a disadvantage by having online or blended coursework. Here on campus, with our BYU Online, we pull the student ratings every semester. We run some Dr. Eggett in the statistics department runs a very elaborate statistical analysis of how the BYU Online sections are doing in terms of student grades and student ratings compared to the day sections. We just got that report on Monday for fall semester, and there was no statistical difference between the day and online student ratings and student grades. So that's the first semester that that's been the case though. So that whole iterative process, it makes a difference because as you iterate, hopefully you improve too. Good questions, thanks. Any other questions? Or maybe?
Right, well, let's thank
Good.
Jennifer for